Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Light Reading Podcast. I'm Jeff Baumgartner, a senior editor at Light Reading.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to be with you here. I'm Peter Jarich, head of GSMA Intelligence.
All right, Peter. Hey, glad to have you on the podcast today. I've been following some of your work of late at the GSMA. So today we're going to be dipping into the topic du jour, artificial intelligence, right? And kind of try to steer that discussion toward what the telecom companies and operators are doing with AI today, or perhaps what they plan to do with it in the future. And I think we'll try to touch on the big AI related item in the news of late. We'll try to talk about a little bit this DeepSeek thing that's in the headlines and maybe what that might mean for the operators. But so Peter, you and I were speaking a few weeks after GSMA Intelligence put out the results of your latest AI focused survey of around 100 operators that was conducted last fall. And I covered it in some detail recently and kind of hung my hat on the money question, that nearly half of those surveyed said they were dedicating like 5 to 15% of their digital budgets toward AI for things like data systems, large language models, infrastructure upgrades. So, Peter, just to start off, we won't go to every intricacy of the survey, but maybe start off by telling us a little bit about GSMA Intelligence and the role there at the organization, and then have you talk about the origins of these AI studies, as I believe you've conducted at least 2 others. So talk about that and maybe why AI has become such an important focus of your research.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a great question. I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because I think about this from a few years ago, right? When I was talking with some other analysts, and I'll come back to a bit about what my team does, right? But I was talking with some other analysts at an IoT conference, probably a decade ago, and this other analyst was saying, "Yep, I've been looking more at IoT. I guess we're now all IoT analysts, right?" And her point was, IoT at the time had become such an important topic that I think everyone wanted to understand, that it became part of what every industry analyst, what every market research sort of team was looking at. So my team, GSMA Intelligence, we're the research and consulting arm here at the GSMA. So I think a lot of folks know who the GSMA is. My team does a lot of work for internal businesses. People inside the GSMA, there's questions maybe they want to answer about the industry or help our members understand, right? Questions that our members have. And so we do a lot of work with internal teams, but then also with a lot of external folks, external customers. And so we try to operate like most other research firms with the benefit of being inside the GSMA. So we get some great access to mobile operators. And I think going back to that idea, right, of how we looked at IoT maybe a decade ago, and I wasn't at the GSMA, I was GSMA Intelligence back then, but industry analyst in general. I think it's similar for AI right now, right? We know it's important, but I think what research firms often do best is when we help people make sense of things that it's just big question marks, right? And anytime there's a big market disruption, there's an opportunity to sort of
cycle.
Yeah.
IoT, same thing. Yeah.
100% fair, right? And I think when we don't get it right, when I say we as an industry, right? But when market researchers and analyst firms don't get it right, it's when they sort of contribute to that hype cycle without thinking. Right. I think there's a big question about influencers versus analysts and whether they pump things up and sort of say, yes, IoT is going to be the next big thing without really thinking it through. Right. And I think that's the industry sometimes gets blamed, for that. But I think what we do well is when as a whole is work with the industry to help come up with those answers together. And for our customers, whether that's mobile operators or the mobile ecosystem, this is a big question. right. What should we be doing with AI? What can we do with it? What is the industry doing, just to highlight some great examples? And so that's why it's become such a big part of what my team is doing, which I assume is the case, I think, for most research firms. We really want to try and help the market understand what's going on and try how to make the best of it.
Right. Yeah. I think it's a big deal because there is a lot of hype and discussion around AI, and I think everyone, rightfully, would struggle with it a little bit in terms of kind of getting a grasp on what it means to my company or my industry, and just kind of getting away from, uh, or being a little more focused about the discussion and what it means for me
Yeah,
versus
yeah, and I think you're right, and I think that sort of confusion also comes with a little bit of FOMO, right? There's a little bit of FOMO
right.
of oh no, I'm behind, right? Clearly,
Mhm.
I'm behind. I don't know what to do, and I'm not just saying for operators, right? But for enterprises, across the board, right? There's this sort of where do we sit, and so I think part of what I've really enjoyed doing is working with some of our operator customers to highlight some of the cool things they're doing, right? I think we all see a lot of what's going on with the GPU as a service models, right? Lots of launches around the world where operators are getting involved in that. You see some of what's going on with things like AI factories. You just saw the announcement last week from Verizon.
Yeah.
You're
Oh, yeah. That was
seeing
huge.
in,
Yeah. When you dedicate part of your earnings call to an initiative, it's like, okay, I guess we should pay attention to what they're
when a
doing
product
here.
launch when a
Yeah.
pro I can't tell if a product manager, if it's exciting or daunting to say, hey, your product's going to get be part
A
of an
little
earnings
both.
call.
Yeah.
Great. I guess it's important, but oh no, that's a big, I mean, yeah, it's obviously top of mind for everyone. And I think one of the things that I've seen, and you asked sort of a bit about the series. So we've been doing this series for the last year, the sort of telco AI state of the market. We've been doing that for a few reasons. One, so many different angles to the story, right? There's a sustainability angle, there's a security angle, there's a network transformation angle, the ROI angle, so much going on in terms of, you know, what this means, the intersection of what telcos are doing in AI, responsible AI, how we think about that. But two, I think that traditionally telcos have been known for, if nothing else, being perceived as being slow on the uptake for new technologies, slow to adopt things. I think AI is one of those where there's a lot of folks that that they really haven't leveraged it. Now,
Well, they're
there I
big
think part
ships. It's hard to. Yeah, you can't really. They're not like motorcycles. Yeah, it's like they're a little. They're not super agile, right? Yeah. So how do you?
and I
Yeah.
think there's two reasons for that. You're right. So they're big organizations. They're also big organizations that are delivering in many cases like mission critical, business critical infrastructure that have a lot of regulatory demands placed on them. So if something does go wrong, right, then that's not always great, right? And there's definitely more than just public facing PR issues. There's potentially big issues when you try a new technology and something goes wrong, right? So I think there has been this tendency to go slow. And I think part of what has been really fun working with our operator members and working across the industry is showcasing some of the cool stuff that has been going on, right? Some of the cool use cases, some of which, like I mentioned, right, GPU as a service, the factory stuff, but even sort of a lot of the language development, the work that's being done by various operators around the world, whether it's Vion, whether it's Orange, whether it's the work going on down in Barcelona with Barcelona Supercomputer. Uh, I mean, the efforts that you're sort of seeing from the telco industry, it's really, yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I thought it was an interesting to look through it because it kind of the study I thought provided a nice reality check on the telco thinking related to AI and the different aspects that you talked about. And I mentioned one of the things that we really focused on initially in our coverage of it, and that was how much are they spending of the digital budget right now. But when you kind of looked at the last study that you did, I mean, what do you think was your biggest? What do you think was the biggest takeaway, or and maybe the biggest surprise, from the last batch of research you did on that topic?
Yeah, I think from a takeaway, and I'd say more than just the last report. And I think we wanted this to be a series because because there is so much to go into, but it all builds on itself, right? And the market changes over time. And so I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways is this question around ROI, right? And how complicated it is, because from a very basic perspective, we all know what ROI is, right? Are you making money on your investments, right? If you're going to spend that, you're going to spend that 10-15% or more. And to be fair, a lot of operators have said they'll be spending more of their digital transformation budgets on AI. What do you get for that, right? Like what? How does it raise your revenues, right? What's the return on investments? It's as it says on the tin, right? And what was interesting is two things there. One, when you go out and you ask operators, like, what are the barriers to looking at deploying AI? ROI is near the bottom, right? And that tells you one of two different things. I think it actually probably tells you both, right? There is an optimism and expectation that these investments are going to pay off, right? There's not this worry of, oh no, where is this money going? Which isn't the case for every new technology, right? When we go out and we talk to them about things like, NTNs, right? Investing in satellites or some of these new technologies, the ROI initially is kind of still getting figured out, right? So I think there's a big faith there, but also I think it's telling you that somehow those ROI considerations aren't driving those decisions, right? We know we need to do this. We'll figure out the ROI later, right? We are being pushed to do this by our competitors. We're being pushed to do this by our shareholders. We're sure there's an ROI, which on the one hand might sort of seem counterintuitive. On the other hand, this really fits with what we see with when we go and we talk to them, we work across the industry. We see this recognition that ROI is more than just sort of the bottom line, how this works out. It is, how is this going to transform our business, right? How do we become an AI native business? It's a buzz term, not a fan of it, but it sort of explains what they're looking at. How do I upskill my employees so that they really have these capabilities? And also, how do I embed things like responsible AI in my organization? And so I think it recognizes that as much as we all think we know what ROI is, it's more complex when we think about what that return actually really means. So I think for me, that was a real fun. That was one of the fun
Yeah,
findings.
I wonder if that means also that there's a greater willingness to experiment with AI without always having to attach it to an ROI, because of how potentially important it is to have this integrated into your business for the future of ROI. And also, you talked about upskilling. Yeah, I imagine a lot of this also has to do with building expertise in this area because it's still pretty nascent. So I imagine they're still building out that part of the organization. I don't know
100,
if that comes through on the research or not, but
yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think skills continue to be one of those things that does show up as an obstacle. It does show up as a barrier because we're talking about going from a space where AI was the realm of data scientists to a space where, if the real value of Gen AI, right, and the reason why we're talking about Gen AI right now is because, tools like ChatGPT made it, democratized it, right? Put it into the hands of everyone, right? And that's why we're talking about it, right? AI is not new. Operators have been using some form of AI for years, right? Generally, machine learning based solutions to optimize their networks, run their networks more efficiently, do things like automation. We've been looking at that for years, but we're talking about AI now because Gen AI tools have put AI into the hands of all sorts of folks, right? That democratization. But but the democratization sort of assumes people know how to use it and know how to do things with it, other than just sitting on ChatGPT and asking it for some, cool new names for my pet dog, right? It's how do I use this to do
it is very
important
useful for
things?
that, by the way. But yeah,
Yeah,
the use cases are
I'm
endless.
not.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would. I'm not sure I would trust it with that one. But it
Yeah,
is. How do I use this for something? How do I make sure my teams actually know how to use this? Not to tell them how to use it, but to give them those skills so that they can go, okay, I see how to apply this in what I'm doing. And again, it's not just telcos; it's every industry. But that upskilling
it's a
side of things
tool.
is crucial.
Yeah, it's a tool. It's like, how do I use this tool? It's you don't just give a person a chainsaw, and say, hey, have at it. It's like you
Uh,
want to teach them a little bit about how to use that first, I would think, before you start cutting away. But
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I made sure to get good instructions from my dad before I used the chainsaw the first time.
yeah, me too. Lawnmower, those types of things where, yeah, I could do some serious damage. So
Wear your steel-toed boots.
right. I mean, that's important, and I will have to figure out what the equivalent is in the AI world to the steel-toed boot. But I think the same type of idea applies. Being responsible and being safe, I guess. Right. And speaking of safety, part of the study I thought was focused on cybersecurity concerns pertaining to AI and your membership and who you're working with. I guess maybe there's no surprise that the big one that came up was the potential impact on mobile networks, right? Because that's their bread and butter, the core of
Yeah.
everything they're doing. Um, but bigger picture though, how does cybersecurity really enter the discussion for AI for these operators? I think there were a number of different areas that were brought up as areas of concern, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's a topic that I don't think gets enough focus. And if we start this sort of outside the work that we do, on the AI side of things, right? We work with operators on an annual basis to understand their network transformation strategies, what they're doing. And one of the things that we've seen consistently over the last few years is when we ask them their priorities, right? What's your strategic priority in terms of how you think about networks, how you're evolving them, end user and network security at the top, right? Some things come and go. And this is, that might seem, well, duh, right? Makes sense, right? But, if we look back, maybe a decade or even less than a decade ago, security was always something that was never at the bottom because you wouldn't want to say you're not concerned, but never at the top because you wouldn't want to say you're really concerned, right? Like it's sort of in the
It was like
middle, right?
reactionary
Because
in a way. It felt like it wasn't.
yeah,
You didn't
yeah.
feel
I
that
mean,
from the
again,
start. Yeah,
yeah, and that was years ago, right? But it was sort of, Lord, I don't want to say it's at the top because I don't want to show that I'm worried about it. I don't really I've got this thing sorted, but you don't want to say it's the bottom. Now, we've seen that rise steadily. I think it's rise steadily not because operators aren't prepared and they know how to deal with this, but because the amount of threats and the different ways to create those threats and the network breaches have gone up, right? And they've seen the consequences of that. And so, with that as a backdrop, not surprising to see sort of AI fit into that conversation. And, I think a lot of folks talk about AI as a sort of dual edged sword. I like to think about it less as a dual edged sword. And we saw that in our research, but also what we're beginning to see is really this recommendation that's more of a I don't know if there's such a thing as a three-edged sword. I don't know. Maybe I've made. I assume
a
somewhere in Game
trident.
of Thrones or somewhere, there's probably some sort of weird, non-usable sword. But I think about it in this way, and we've seen this, right? That on the one
Yeah.
hand, operators get the value of AI to securing their networks. The number of threats that are out there, keeping up with all of them. You need tools to help you deal with them. On the other hand, we recognize AI is going to be is a tool already being used by bad actors to help come up with new ways, particularly things like fraud, particularly things like phishing, smishing, all of that. Lots of new ways to you know develop new ways to breach networks. Now that dynamic is taking place, one fighting against the other. But what I think is interesting that we don't necessarily hear a lot about, but is really important, is as operators do spend money, we go back to that investment side of things, developing out their AI infrastructure, developing out those solutions, we're definitely going to need to see those be secured in their own right. right? So not just a how do I secure my networks in general, how do I secure against these threats versus developing the threats, but thinking about security for that AI infrastructure that you're developing, because that is going to be a particularly it's going to be a particularly interesting and attractive target for someone who wants to target a network, especially if you're pulling in lots of data.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds like, yes, I mean, cybersecurity got to have that concern addressed right up front versus kind of going, well, we'll just deal with it as it emerges, and
Built
yeah,
in,
then it'd be too late. Yeah.
built in from the beginning to actually secure that AI infrastructure that you're spending so much money on.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what you're looking at coming up down the line, right? Because this is the latest of a set of AI related studies. So, what else is kind of on your roadmap at GSMA Intelligence? Are you looking to expand on the AI topic, or are there other facets of interest, that the operators are going to need to know about?
So I think it's a bit of both, right? So I think that one of the things we'll want to do later this year is go back to those same operators that we talked to, go back to the ecosystem to understand how a year later their strategies, their plans, the progress has changed, right? Have they made progress against those obstacles? Where are they seeing success in deployment, and look at some of those use cases. So I think that's important, right? Going to see where progress has been made. But to your point, lot of new areas to look at, right? So I think what I'm particularly interested in uh, is this question of, I mean, two things really, and they're kind of interrelated. One, the question of how do we think about distributed AI, right? And I think sometimes you hear edge AI, yeah, they
Distributed
capture
on your phone kind of thing, or
where, yeah, and I think that so,
yeah.
so so that is the question, right? I think a lot of times people talk about edge AI or inferencing at the edge, and my problem with that is no one can ever define the edge for me, right? Is the edge your phone? Is the edge a border gateway, a border router? Is the edge your router in your house? Is it in the operator's network at the base station? It can be all of the above, right? But
Lots of edges.
how do we see it progressing, and why? Because so much of the discussion to date has been, well, edge is really important for latency. And I think that I get that messaging, right? I get that messaging from when we first started talking about edge. It's easy for people to understand. It's kind of exciting. It's done a real disservice, I think, in general to edge, because it kind of said, well, this is a tool for when you need low latency. Now the reality is, now we think about it in terms of things like AI, processing at the edge, sure, latency is important. Low latency applications, video analytics, all sorts of applications there. But it's more than that, right? It's about resiliency. So that if that connection goes down, you don't have to have a connection back to the cloud. It's about data sovereignty, data protection, right? If you're dealing with sensitive data, you don't have to send that somewhere. It's about costs, right? Sending all this stuff and having it processed in one of the hyperscalers clouds isn't always the most cost effective solution. So I think we're going to see what those use cases are. I think it was a big part, right, of the Verizon news from just recently, right, looking at edge, how edge fits into that. And so I think for me that's going to be critical to see how that plays out. But also, how does that orchestration play out between edge and core cloud, because that's going to be key, right? It's not just an either or. It's not just everything on the device, everything in the cloud. It's going to be, orchestrating somewhere in between. How that looks, how operators play a role will be, something I think we need to watch. And then two, related to that,
All
we've
right.
been spending quite a while, and I think anyone who, especially in the telco space, has been following AI. We know this dynamic of AI for networks and networks for AI, right? This idea that AI is a great tool for helping run networks, improve networks, make networks run more efficiently, more securely, making them higher performance. But also, if we want to run AI workloads for everyone else, we have to have networks that are built to support AI requirements. Now, we've seen a lot of focus on the former part, right? How AI can help networks. But the amount of discussion for how we will build networks to support AI workloads what those workloads will look like and what telcos will have to do and what they are doing beyond the GPU as a service stuff, right? Beyond building out edge, but more broadly, what do you need to do to build a network to support AI? I think that's something that we haven't seen as much of. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that discussion for the rest of the year.
Right. Yeah, and I think the speed of everything continues to. It feels like it's continuing to accelerate, even though we're kind of in the early days in a way. But one last thing I wanted to touch on is the recent news about this DeepSeek model, right? So when I first started reading about that this week, beyond the what it was doing to Nvidia's stock, it reminded me of the fictional like deep thought supercomputer in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It found that the ultimate question to life, the universe, and everything was 42 was the answer. But yeah, I mean, so that's comical and everything. But what we're talking about here is a possible new approach to AI models from a company in China that purports to be much cheaper and require a lot less processing, or it's a lot less intensive from the processing side than we've seen in the market. And maybe this will be something that'll come out in some future research. But yeah, I mean, there's still a lot to learn here. But what are some of your initial thoughts about how just the idea or DeepSeek might have in terms of an impact on the operator interest and adoption in AI? Because my first thought is that, well, maybe it could spur more interest merely by the fact that it purports to be, less expensive than what we've seen traditionally.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is, and and you're right that it sort of showed up and it's really captured the market's attention, and I think that's really telling, right? Because it really was like overnight, right? And it went overnight from
Yeah,
something
like
that,
all of a
it,
sudden, like
and
the
it's been
world's different.
it's been around for a while. The models have been published. Like this is not folks who know, but overnight this became new. Like when it shows up in my kitchen Echo, right? When my Amazon device is showing it up in my kitchen and talking about it, and my wife is asking about it, it is something that everyone is talking about, and I think that's telling because there's so much going on there, right? There's so much going on there about the state of the U.S. tech industry and what's fueling that, and the investments that are out there, and are those investments required? Because if here's a company that can do things for a couple million versus billions, what does that mean in terms of innovation? And what can you do with thinking differently about how you use new silicon offers versus questions of how different geopolitics going on? Like it's so juicy, right? And I think that there's
Mhm.
so many angles to that story that obviously there's something for everyone to think about there. For me, what I think is really interesting, and you kind of hit on it, is you know when I think about going back to that question about developing networks to support these AI workloads, I think about what do those AI workloads look like, right? And increasingly, it's not just more traffic, right? Because we know there's going to be more traffic and AI queries and chatbots and AI augmented applications are going to drive that. But what I think will be interesting is the types of those queries, right? It's going to be multimodal queries. It's going to be not just send me an answer to my question, but send me a video, send me a photo, send me something that's rich. It's going to be sending that to make a query on that, right? Going from typing in a query to answer this for me to someone saying, hey, here's a video, answer this for me, or here's photos, right? And what I think is interesting is that's the kind of thing that I think from an operator perspective, we need to be thinking about in terms of how to build the networks to support that. And now if we can have solutions that continue to innovate and drive more of that, then I think regardless of what you want to think about the models involved or what it's going to take, it really points to this fact that there will be more traffic, different types of traffic, and we need to be on top of it, right? Because yes, this is the news now. No doubt 6 months from now, there will be some other news that is similar, something that we didn't expect, something that came out of left field. But the idea of it driving more traffic in a really compelling way that people engage with, that I don't see changing.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be interesting to see if there's a there's you'd say, but I guess the possibility of a breakthrough, obviously did get a lot of attention, and it caused quite a bit of chaos in the market. You're right; it was like overnight, and it did feel like it came out of left field. So, we'll have to see what comes down the line.
Lots
Out
of
of left
intrigue,
field.
lots of people paying attention, questioning why are we talking about this now? But it's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, definitely makes the market exciting.
Yeah, great. Well, great. Well, I think that's where we're going to leave it for today, Peter. So, thanks a lot for joining me on the podcast. We'll look forward to learning a lot more about your findings in the future surveys with the operators, and to kind of see how things adjust or how they change in the months to come.
Now, thank you, Jeff. It was great talking to you. Hopefully, we'll see you at MWC, or any of your listeners who want to get in touch. Always happy to talk more about this.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have a contingent there. So, I'm sure look forward to seeing what's going on at that show. We'll have to see what comes out of left field for sure. So,
Thank you, Jeff.
all right, thanks.